When I was thinking about, and now, in conversation with Irene and Ileana about what we wanted to present on, really wanting to start from the place of the power of young people. So many of our greatest social movements in history, especially recent movements, have actually been led or have been really expanded out greatly because of young people. And so that first image is actually the Black Lives Matters movement, which young people did not start, but which young people's voice and social media presence really pushed off in Ferguson. There's also the police anti-gun violence movement. They came out of Parkland and other schools. Standing Rock is actually a young person movement. And of course, the civil rights movement and the anti-Vietnam War movement. And the reason we wanted to start with the power of young people is, I'll speak for myself and for mycelium, one of the reasons that I get really excited about working with young people is that we can do culture shifts and changes with young people. And that it is so much easier to do it with young people because young people have already an innate sense of justice. They're already thinking outside of the box. They're not as indoctrinated into current systems as adults. And if we work with young people when they're young and we're able to tap into that sense of justice and equity, we can really start transforming culture long term. The other reason is to avoid adultism and how adultism functions in our cultures and I see that often in the work as like, young people are so inspirational or they give me hope, but we're not actually doing anything to give young people institutional power to make change in their lives, particularly around an issue like climate change, because it's going to affect them so much. And I did have this quote that I took from RBG and I modified a little bit. She said, women belong in all the places where decisions are being made. But I really strongly believe that youth belong in all of the places where decisions are made, especially places where we know are going to have long-term effects on their lives.
Yeah, and from the perspective of Watsonville Wetlands Watch, we work a lot with youth in terms of youth development, leadership, engagement, education, and we work with youth from ages 5th grade all the way through high school. And one of the things that we've seen with our education programs has been that once youth start becoming involved in our environmental work or with their community and start getting confident in their leadership skills and their ability to communicate and start validating for themselves that they have something worthy of speaking about, or that they have a space and they own that space in a conversation, is that they often make career choices based on those experiences. So we've seen a lot of youth go off to top tier universities to study ecological microbiology or ecology or forest management, and those types of majors often lead to careers in environmental conservation in the environmental sectors. And so it also really in the long term plays an important role in diversifying how we define environmental conservation in the workforce and the people that are advocating on behalf of our environment.
And then 2 more additional points is just the disproportionate impact on the youth, and like future generations are going to be the ones that are really getting hit. And we're already seeing it right now with more of the changes in with climate change and extreme weather events, that youth should be getting involved because they're the ones being impacted, and their voice should matter even if they're not having the ability to vote yet, because a lot of climate change was caused by older generations, but the brunt of it is going on these younger generations. And then another point that's been really cool to see is a lot of the younger generations now are just more politically aware. They know about social justice issues. They show up to events. They join in solidarity. They go out to protest. They're organizing on their own. And that's just really inspiring to see. And you see things like the Sunrise Movement, which is like entirely youth led. And so there's really so much power in partnering with youth and lifting up their voices. And so we, from our own experience, put together some different tips and strategies for working with youth. Feel free to also like contribute and post in the chat if there's others that you also have from your work. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what when we were thinking about the presentation, one of the things that I was thinking about in terms of what has allowed Mycelium Youth Network to really do great work with young people, and as a quick reminder, Mycelium works with young people to prepare them for climate change, and we work with 3rd through 12th grade, is meeting young people where they're at. And in that, like figuring out like what are the things that they're passionate about, whether that is environmental justice or not, or other spaces. So if it's gaming, then like getting passionate about gaming. If it is social media, getting passionate about social media, like figuring out what are the things and issues that they really care about, and then modifying what we're doing so that it's not that youth have to meet us where we're at and the issues that we think are important, but that we're actually able to meet them where they're at. Also supporting and empowering them to be decision makers. So often you adults create spaces where young people have to come in, learn a ton of language, and it's just kind of like throwing them in the deep end of the pool. And we don't believe in that. Like, we really believe in supporting young people and empowering them to actually have institutional power. And that could be institutional power at, our organizational level in terms of the curriculum that they're learning, in terms of who is teaching them, in terms of, who they want to see in positions of leadership, or just empowering them as decision makers in their own lives. The other thing that is a do to try to figure out is providing a safe container to process and store information and emotions. And this one becomes really important when we look at the issues of climate change. Like, as an adult, I have such a hard time with climate change. I have so much anxiety. It is really difficult to not feel a sense of hopelessness or despair. And as we talk to young people feel that magnified, because oftentimes young people don't have places where they're given decision-making power. They're consistently told to wait or to hold their voice, whether that's at school or in other relationships. And so being able to figure out a way to talk to them about difficult issues, and then creating a container to be able to store those emotions. And so that might mean that for example, when we're talking to young people about sea level rise, that we're not just like presenting facts and data and then we're moving on. It might mean that we like speak about sea level rise and then spend the rest of a lesson just letting young people process what they're feeling, processing those fears, processing what they want to see, what they want to be able to create, but actually like having a space to be able to process it emotionally, because we can't just like rush to the work itself or to the project that we want to have young people's voices. Like, we need to actually treat them as whole human beings. And that means being able to provide a safe space. One of the ways that we try to do that at Mycelium is through bringing in ancestral traditions and practices. So it's both being able to speak about your emotions, but then sometimes when we're in person, it can look like being able to smoke one another off with sage, with rosemary, with lavender, with gopal. It could mean drumming. It could mean singing songs. It could mean creating artwork together. I mean, there's multiple ways that young people can be able to process what they're feeling, and then be able to then, from that space of groundedness, start thinking about what solutions they want to be able to see. Also move at the space of relationships. And by that, I mean, like, young people vote with their feet. If they don't feel like an issue is important to them, they're going to stop showing up. And so being able to cultivate that relationship, again, find things that they're interested in, figure out how to bring those into the space, that develops a relationship. And then a young person is like, oh, I can tell that you're somebody that I trust, because you actually care not just about this thing that you want me to take action on, but you actually care about me as a person. And you're interested in being able to bring my perspective into what we're doing together. So I'm not coming, again, into a space that is not designed for me. The entire space is designed to cultivate those relationships. Also, creating space for them to dream. I think this one is, I'm going to be slightly out of time. Being able to create space for them to just dream and vision and play. I think this is the biggest lesson we're consistently learning at Mycelium, is like, how do we create spaces for them to dream and have that imagination that will then have support in creative building of solutions. Some quick don'ts are: don't come with a set agenda. Let young people lead and guide. Don't yuck other people's yum. That means like, don't be dismissive of them on like social media or gaming or whatever thing that you're like, oh, that's just youth being silly. Don't be defensive. Youth have a amazing quality of being able to challenge what they don't like. And we want to empower that so that they're feeling confident in being able to challenge larger systems. And don't be afraid to bring your full nerdy selves if you are nerdy in whatever way that looks like, because I think youth really respond to authenticity.
I think that's very true, Lil. Thank you for sharing the insight and wisdom learned through your work. I'm Ileana, representing Watsonville Wetlands Watch today, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about, through that same vein that Lil was talking about, meeting youth where they're at. I'm going to highlight kind of how Watsonville Wetlands Watch structured their programs and some of the features of those programs to really get the youth out and about into our natural spaces and into our wetlands and exploring and learning about how fun science can be. So first of all, I mean, straight off the bat, COVID changed everything. It changed the definitions of how people can interact, the mediums through which they can interact. And you can imagine that for youth, that was a really, really big hit. You know, they look a lot to their peer networks for support, for guidance, for understanding. And it meant a lot of changes for Watsonville Wetlands Watch. So we switched from being an in-person program to being mostly online based, especially with our younger education participants in 5th grade through middle school. For the high schoolers who are extra dependent on their peer networks and who were just needing some space away from their family, we switched to an in-person outdoor only program with masks and social distancing. So again, it's part of like meeting who are your youth and what ages are they, and then what are their needs? How do you structure
Give me your hairstyle so I can do your hair.
And then another thing that happened with the pandemic was that youth saw a high rate of unemployment. Typically in the past, where they could have gotten a summer job working at a fast food chain or at a local retail store, there were now many more people in our community competing for those same jobs, a lot of them adults. And so that left a high unemployment rate for our youth. And in talking with our youth about participating with us or their desire to continue working with us, they said, I'd love to, but I can't. My family can't afford, you know, my family can't afford to have me be without income. I need to be bringing money into my family. And so we decided to offer $500 stipends for participating in the program. So that way youth didn't have to choose between their family's daily needs and their personal interests that could lead to a long-term rewarding career. Not to mention, you know, just being outside, it's good for your body and soul. So we also started hiring youth for their first jobs so that they could come work with us and get first job experience and learn what it's like to report to a manager, be accountable, have responsibilities, and then earn your paycheck. And then some typical challenges that we see, regardless of whether there's you know, once in a century pandemic happening or not, questions we always get from youth is like, yeah, I'd love to go, but I don't have a car, I can't drive, how am I going to get there? Or like, yeah, but my family just can't afford to pay the program fees, it's outside of our budget, I can't go. Or who else is coming? You know, who from my social network and from my group of friends that I want to spend time with will also be there, because then that will make it more worthwhile. Kind of echoing Lil's point about how teenagers vote with their feet. So we make all of our programs free. We tell them, don't worry about it, it's free, you can come if you want to. Most of your friends are there, they're probably telling you to come, which is why you're talking to us. And then how will I get there? We have a van, so we schedule our outings in accordance with that van and small groups of people that can come out with us, so that transportation isn't an issue. Essentially, we take all of those barriers and questions and just kind of dismantle them and say, if you want to participate, you can. There is absolutely no barrier to coming and participating. And then another thing that we've learned is that it's so important to underscore what Lil was saying earlier, to really get to know your youth and to be social with them. And getting to know your youth means not just getting to know them, but getting to know their families. You know, they'll talk to you about their aunts, their uncles, their sisters, and all of the different family dynamics, and just being there and holding that space for them to have a neutral third party outlet in their social sphere. In addition, I can't underscore this, it is a productive time for them to be with their friends. And so a lot of time families are kind of okay, like, oh, you want to go do that, that's fine. You know, I know you're in a safe space with adults that are watching over you and you're having fun with your friends, as opposed to other activities that they could be involved with. And one of the things that we found is that we now have built-in social media gurus. They tell us exactly what's at the forefront of social media. They know how to put in together all the posts, all the tags, and they have so much fun with it. So we have like this kind of built-in new communications channel as a result of our youth engagement. And it's just been so wonderful to work with them. I think with that, I will turn it over to Irene so that she can share her bits of wisdom with us as well.
That's awesome. I think kind of ending on that youth being really awesome social media gurus kind of like ties in to my slide. So just really talking about youth outreach strategies, just knowing with technology, things are just constantly changing over and over, and kind of sticking to our tried and true methods of outreach might not work reaching youth. So with youth, it's really about, you know, strong social media engagement. They're online, on so many different platforms, and like just knowing the types of content that works. Like you want to make sure that when you're making flyers, they're very visual, incorporating like art, and training youth how to use Canva so they can learn how to design flyers that are like visually appealing to them. And then also just knowing that youth really like video content now, and so like being able to use some of the youth you're working with, or you yourself creating these short video information on like whatever whatever outreach you're trying to share. So I have like an example that I wanted to share with one of our youth advocates. Let me see if it'll play. I didn't get to test it out.
¿Sabías que el delta provee agua a más de 27 millones de californianos? Y su biodiversidad es importante para más de 750 plantas y animales. Si te importa el delta y su futuro, mantente alrededor y descubre más. El impacto de la industrialización ha aumentado. ¿Qué tan expuestos estamos a incendios forestales? El tipo de enfermedades respiratorias que tenemos en nuestro entorno y los riesgos de inundación para todos los residentes del condado de San Joaquín. Así que si quieres hacer conocer tus preocupaciones, entonces piensa en unirte a la Junta Salve el Delta a las 6 de la tarde vía Zoom para hacer conocer tus preocupaciones.
So I just pause it there just to really show, like, I didn't know that much about TikTok before this year, but and my impression of it was, you know, like a lot of young people are on there. You just kind of see people dancing, but actually to really learn from the youth that a lot of youth go to TikTok as a learning space, and you can kind of, as you start to cultivate it to your interests, it can be like a way to just get a lot of information and learn different information. And as you can see, like by the video that our youth made, that it can be really easy, where you're just like speaking in front of a green screen. You might be putting the different images behind you, whether it's the flyers or pictures of like the area that you're advocating for. And her posting that ended up getting a lot more youth engaging in a Delta adaptation meeting, where we're talking about the impacts of climate change a lot more than our typical social media outreach. So that's just like kind of a way to, again, like lift up youth and just like the knowledge that they have around social media, and meeting them where they're at on the platforms they're at, which is, you know, mainly like TikTok and Instagram now. And with youth, it's about having credible messengers to do outreach. So really having youth reach out to other youth is effective, or, you know, trusted neighborhood adults or people of the same background is important. And making sure, as people mentioned, that youth are not just engaged, but they're having opportunities to take an active role in leadership and having their voice being part of the planning. It was mentioned like creating a safe space for them so they feel welcome, and they have they can come in and be a part of programs, but also, you know, have a safe space to do homework or check in with mentors. And then I also just put in just different cool social media account examples on how they're incorporating some of, you know, more of these visuals and videos. So I put like Sunrise Movement, Youth Organized California, just some different organizations, as well as our social media networks.
¿Sabías que el Delta provee agua a más de 27 millones de californianos?
Engage with young people. Actually, also, I'm going to put in an image into the chat, which I tried to add to the slideshow super late. And so one of the things that like we really try to do is, again, like meet young people where they're at and figure out what are issues that they're really passionate about. And some of the ways that we've done that is, and we have a lot of flexibility. The ways that I'm going to describe are things that we're able to do when we're both not in direct classroom experience. So when we have a little bit more flexibility, whether that's through an after school program or a weekend program, we also try to incorporate different ways in classrooms. But first I'll speak to those outside experiences. Last year we were looking at what we wanted to create for like a 2-day conference. We're like, we want to be able to come together around climate change. Fire season was horrible last year. What are we going to do to be able to support young people? And rather than like, you know, us putting together a conference as adults, we went out and we have a focus group for young people, and we often gather young people to talk about like, how are you feeling about our programming? What are do's and don'ts? What are strategies that you want to see us grow in? And if we did a conference, what would you want to learn? And they said that they wanted to play. They said that they wanted to dream and they wanted to vision, and that climate change was already such a scary topic that they didn't want to have like here's another slide of how death will come for us all. You know, they're like, we actually want to play with it. And so we created from that Apocalyptic Resilience, which was an Afro and Indigenous virtual adventure. It was an intergenerational conference where we gamified climate change. We're like, in order for people to sign up, whether you were youth or adults, you had to create a D&D, a Dungeons and Dragons character. And then every single workshop that we had was gamified, but then, so it was like either presenters who were creating avatar versions of themselves, or, you know, doing cosplay, full dress up. And all of the workshops were topics around climate resilience and adaptation, but they were in game format. And then youth would receive skills like you would level up in a video game. And then the second half of the second day, we played an environmental justice Dungeons and Dragons. And we had 150 people, 140, 150 people attend. Half of those were young people. And out of the young people, about like 65 of the 70 youth stayed the entire 2 days and were at every single event. And that told us that like, even in the era of being zoomed out, that if we gamify spaces, if we like lean into the spaces that they're already really interested in, that it can have a fairly big impact. When we're in person, we also do nature walks. So we're just getting young people out there. We're like having them see their landscapes through different eyes, getting them to start thinking about what's out there. How are they learning to identify medicinal and edible plants? How are they taking those plants, making tinctures and salves with them? We also do a lot of, there's like this like Dungeons and Dragons icon. I don't know if y'all seem pretty cool. So you might not know Dungeons and Dragons, but that 20-sided die is a D&D dice. And we actively do a lot of play around that. We also, almost all of our activities are really, really, really hands-on. And so while we'll talk about an issue that youth care about, there's immediate put into practice. This is what it's going to look like in practice. Also, I like the image I dropped in the chat was, yes, we could always play Dungeons and Dragons or do workshops. The image I put in the chat was of one of the events that we run. So about 4 times a year, we run affinity groups. And those are completely free spaces. And all of our programming is free for Title I schools. But affinity spaces, one of which I put on there, which is a Talk Black to Me, which is a Black youth affinity group, are spaces that are just there to create emotional containers for young people to talk about whatever it is that they're thinking about. And we have no agenda beyond young people coming together with a trusted mentor who is just holding space with them for 6 weeks. And it is open, so we get young people from across the country that participate. But it is one of our commitments to young people that we don't just care about you having a voice in climate-related issues, but we want you to feel comfortable having a voice and having an experience and holding really complicated, difficult emotions. And so we offer affinity groups for Black youth, for queer youth, for Native youth, and for youth who are doing activism and organizing, because that can be such a draining space. And so those are some of the ways that we really try to integrate youth bringing their whole selves forward into the work that we do.
Thank you, Lil. I actually really want to go to one of those apocalyptic workshops. That sounds like so much fun. I what kind of D&D creature would I be? Again, going into Watsonville Wetlands Watch and a little bit about what we do. As I mentioned earlier, we have a variety of free educational programs that we deliver from 5th grade all the way through high school. A lot of these programs are integrated with our local school district, the Pajaro Valley Unified School District. So they align perfectly with the school district's STEAM and STEM curriculum and provide for hands-on learning outside of the classroom and actually in the wetlands. I think today I'm going to, we have a variety of programs, as I mentioned, but today I'm going to focus on the program I touched on earlier, which is the Climate Corps Leadership Institute. It's for older youth, ages 15 to 18. And as I mentioned, it's a free program with stipends, and it complements what students are learning in the classroom. So after school, they'll come into our offices, which are also conveniently located on the high school campus. And we'll take them out to plant trees around the community, to check in on the wetlands and collect water samples or do data monitoring for the health of the ecosystem, whether that's data samples or like bird population counts, just a variety of different kinds of activities. And we also teach them how to propagate or plant. The picture you see here is one of our students planting a seedling and propagating a natural native plant. We then take these plants and have an annual plant sale, so that brings the revenue back into our organization. But they just help with all aspects of our work. There's nothing that they don't touch. They speak with the community at community events when we're allowed to gather in person. They help host restoration days where they invite the community to come in and help us plant additional native plants and restore the habitat, the wetlands habitat that we have. And really what we've seen come out of this is that these youth form lifelong bonds with nature, whereas before, so we have surveys that we give them before and then after. And before, they're like maybe going to the wetlands like once a month, and by the time our program is over, they're going to the wetlands 3 to 4 times a week, and not just by themselves, but with their friends. They're going on hikes, they're picking up trash, they're teaching their friends about, just like you, Lil, we work with our local tribal council, the Ohlone tribe, as well as the Amamatsan tribe, to teach the students about native plants and medicinal uses and how they're harvested. And so these students pass on this knowledge to their peers as well, we've found, which has been really, really interesting and rewarding. It's like the students, what I call grow into themselves, areas where they might have felt uncomfortable or shy about that were always a part of them are suddenly shining. They feel like they are leaders in their peer groups and within their families, because they talk to their families about these things too, about recycling and climate change and action that we can take together as a family or as a community in really building a healthy environment and ecosystem for us. And wetlands are very, very rare, a very rare ecosystem across the world. And we're just so lucky that in our community that is predominantly Latino, we are charged with caring for and nurturing such an important ecosystem that stores up extra amounts of carbon. So we talk to them a lot about like how this community is special and the uniqueness of where they are and how to care for that. So as I said, another thing that they learn is collecting and interpreting data. So they go out and they count the birds and they say, okay, with this change, what does that mean? So they're learning to think critically and connecting their activities out in the wetlands with scientific research and how that can inform policies or actions. So if we know that these birds are decreasing in population, what does that mean for the health of the wetlands? What does that mean for the health of our community? What does that mean in terms of actions that we need to take? So it really takes them on this holistic cycle of just connecting seemingly disparate dots between scientific research, outdoor activities, and social and peer community engagement. So that's one of the ways that we work with youth to really transform how do I say, our community's approach into environmental conservation, turning that idealism into action, and then turning that action into confident, strong, young stewards of our planet. And with that, I will turn it over to Irene.
So make sure I'm unmuted. I kind of want to maybe start with like sharing a story about like with Fathers and Families, we'd done a lot of youth engagement work even before we started going into the environmental focus. And I think one thing that we had to learn as a lesson is we do so many like political policy advocacy and, making sure our community's voices are part of different like decisions that are being made. And I think something that we didn't realize early on is, like you kind of have to build up youth confidence or, make sure that we're working on like processing through their life experience before we're putting them up for a speaking experience, because that could be something that can be traumatizing if they're opening up their wounds. So that's definitely one lesson I wanted to share on like working with youth and trying to have them advocate, is that you need to kind of work on building that trust and getting them to process through their story before opening them up to those public speaking. And so that was something we had to learn, and our organization kind of like now works at these 4 stages of youth development, where one, you're welcoming them in, making sure that they're integrated into the community, that they feel comfortable. And then from there, like having them understand their story and understanding the history of how different policies have affected their story and impacted them. And at that same time, we're lucky to have our trauma recovery center to be able to process through and work in like mental health and healing into that. And then once that is done and they've kind of gone through a program to understand just the topic of environmental justice, then from there is where we start trying to activate their voice, have them get involved in the community, build up their skills in social media or advocacy or art, whatever it is that they're passionate about. And then from there, they're a leader. So now they're going to be able to like co-facilitate groups and be mentors to other peers and leaders. So that's one thing I wanted to lift up on how we have like evolved in the way we work with youth. One thing our youth have really enjoyed is the doing photo voice, so they can really walk around their neighborhood and take pictures of things that they want to lift up that are positive in their community, and take a picture of things that they want to see changed. And those have been really effective in putting them on a map and presenting them to policymakers, whether it's state or local elected officials, to really hone in on what community members and youth want to see changed and really like pinpoint what area those are at. We do different youth group spaces around healing, environmental justice, and gardening. And just another really thing with youth is working in rites of passage. Like when they're graduating, when they finish a program, it's important to have those graduation ceremonies so they can be recognized for their accomplishment for finishing the program. And that's like a way of also building up their pride and just having that unity on having completed something with their set of peers. We also do a lot of community involvement and volunteering, from going and cleaning up like the waterways and trash in parks, as well as tree planting. And yeah, when we're at the stage when youth have like processed through their stories, we try to find ways for them to plug in and elevate their voice and story, whether it's participating on a youth panel or speaking to an assembly member about a change they want to see. And then also like not just having like just the learning spaces from learning information, but also incorporating in hands-on learning opportunities. And I think both that we've all like kind of mentioned that having youth getting involved with their hands, whether it's gardening or learning like traditional plants, it's just good to kind of like solidify the information in different ways that youth might learn. And then we also have partnered a lot with UC Davis Center for Regional Change on learning youth participatory action research methods, which is really just equipping youth with different research techniques, which include like photo voice, learning how to conduct interviews and create videos to elevate their stories and know how to use that to take action. And then Youth Media Hub, which is just like having them learn the social media skills and initiate their own campaigns around issues that they want to see changed.